My name is Glenn Bell, VP of Strategic Partnerships here at NSA. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us for our fourth session in our EDI professional series on Vendor EDI855 Inbound PO Acknowledgement. Today, we're going to walk through how EDI855 Inbound Purchase Order Acknowledgements are handled in CloudSuite Distribution. To start, we'll take a quick look at the setup required to receive these acknowledgements, along with the ION connection points and data flows that move those transactions into the system. The goal here is to provide enough visibility into the flow so you understand where issues can surface. From there, we'll shift to day-to-day processing. This includes managing inbound acknowledgements in the Electronic Transactions Control Center, reviewing header level and line level errors or exceptions, and approving transactions so purchase orders are updated correctly. This session will also touch on troubleshooting. We'll review common inbound EDI855 errors and show how to trace and validate transactions using ION inbox and outbox admin. By the end of the session, you'll have a clear understanding of how EDI855 acknowledgements move through CloudSuite Distribution, how they update purchase orders, and how that data supports informed business decisions. Again, my name is Glenn Bell. My contact information is on screen, and I'll drop it in chat. We'll have a Q&A also via your submitted questions in chat as well. Those will be at the end of today's presentation. We do ask that you self-mute during the presentation overall. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, I would like to take a moment to share a bit about who we are at NSA. NSA was founded in 1984 and built around the needs of wholesale distributors. From the beginning, we focused exclusively on this space, and we became the first dedicated Infor partner serving the distribution market. Our consulting team is full-time and brings deep experience across cloud, ERP, and distribution. Many of our team members have more than 20 years of experience working with SX Enterprise, CloudSuite Distribution, and distributor-specific business processes. We also support our clients with a broad set of technical capabilities, including integrations, custom development, automation, and the work required to extend or enhance Infor CSD and SXE environments. That brings us to our NSA Plus portfolio. NSA Plus is a strong value add for our clients and brings together more than 20 CloudSuite distribution-focused solutions. These solutions are designed to simplify work, eliminate system gaps, and extend the value of the Infor platform. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter for today, Dave Rumpsch, one of our senior business consultants here at NSA. Dave has been with NSA since 2013 and brings decades of hands-on experience in wholesale distribution with deep expertise in both Infor SX Enterprise and CloudSuite Distribution. EDI, particularly vendor-side transactions, is an area he's worked in extensively with many NSA clients. Dave has also held senior consulting roles directly with Infor, working with customers across the United States, Canada, and Australia, and he's also seen SX evolve from character-based systems all the way through CloudSuite Distribution. He works closely with clients on implementations, operational workflows, and troubleshooting complex scenarios, which makes him a great fit for today's topic. Take it away, Dave.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Today's agenda will be for processing vendor EDI855 inbound purchase order acknowledgements in CloudSuite Distribution. We're going to go over the setups required to process the inbound PO acknowledgements, how to troubleshoot inbound purchase order acknowledgements using the ION inbox outbox, and managing vendor EDI855 inbound purchase order acknowledgements in the Electronic Transaction Control Center. So everyone loves acronyms, so I'm going to use as few of them as I can possibly do, and I'll define 3 of them now for you. EDI stands for Electronic Data Interchange. That's the movement of transactions between organizations in the business environments. The Electronic Transaction Control Center, or ETCC, is where transactions that come into the software through EDI can be visualized and managed for errors, as well as prompting various actions associated with them. And the last one I hope that I'll use, and not too many others, is ION. ION is the intelligent open network, which takes transactions from your network, moves them off through the internet process, and sends them over where they are processed to and from your vendors. Granted, it also is for customer interface as well as other organizations as well. So let's talk about setups required to process vendor EDI855 inbound PO acknowledgements. I'm going to go over the administrative options, the business rules, the vendor e-commerce settings, the vendor product cross-references, units of measure, and carrier codes or shipper codes that are used by the software. So let's get started with those. Setups required also electronic transaction control center setups and reviews, the events that can be used by the system, the ION inbox outbox admin, operator security, and I'll go over some ION connection points and data flows as well. So first, let's talk about administrative options. In the administrative options section of the CloudSuite distribution software, under integrations and ION interface options, you need to turn on the IMS ION inbox outbox, as you can see checked on the left side of the screen. On the right side of the screen are the documents that we will be importing into the software. Specifically for this demonstration, the purchase order acknowledgement processing of the EDI855 needs to be checked. The next thing that's required is to set up business rules. Now, business rules come from table defaults in the system admin tables in the software, and then they are assigned those settings in the business rules setup. In the current configuration of the software, there are 4 business rules that are set up to go to EDI by default. Those need to be changed to ION BOD so that when you set them up, they work through CloudSuite Distribution. If you don't do that, they won't appear in the electronic transaction control center. Those 4 are ignoring exception messages, overriding validation message handling, allow partial transaction updates, and transactions requiring manual review. We'll go over those in more detail shortly. So if you're going to fix those to get ready to process the transactions, you need to go to the table code value setups and then bring up the business rules table. You'll note the ETCC transactions will be brought up there, and I'm going to choose the one called ignore exceptions. Its description is below, ignore exception messages. It defaults to handle through EDI. That needs to be changed to ION BOD, ION-BOD, so that it'll function through the ETCC system. Again, these 4 need to be set that way. These are the business rules that are used by the Electronic Transaction Control Center. We're going to go over about half of these in great detail, and I'll touch on the rest of them. They all need to be set up as business rules if they're going to be used in the software. The 2 at the top are required no matter what you're doing in the software. You need to have a transaction audit working, and also the debug directory needs to be set as well. The others are more optional. However, I would suggest that the majority of them are used as required for your business. Here's what they look like after they've been set up in the software. You can see that the right here, the ION BOD, is where I changed it in the table values so that when I set these up here, they came in properly to be handled through the ION BOD process. When you're done setting them up, that's what they look like. Here's how you would set one up. You go into the business rule setup function and select to create a new one. You select the one that comes in, choose ETCC as a category, select the one you want. In this case, I'm doing transaction requires manual review. You'll notice that I can set these at the global level for all companies in CloudSuite Distribution. I could do it company-wide for the company that I'm working in, or I can be vendor specific, and that can actually go down to the ship from level as well. And here's an example of a vendor who wants to review all transactions that come in through the software in ETCC acknowledgements and approve them before they get into the software and update purchase orders. And when you're, once you get to here, and you've selected the vendor, you need to set the default rule value. So in this case, you're going to say, yes, I'm going to require transaction manual review for that vendor only. The rest of the vendors would go to the default, which would have been set to no. Once you're done setting it up, it'll appear as follows. And you can see that I had one previously set up for the company, set to no. Don't force me to approve every transaction. And now I've set up one specifically for that vendor that will require me to approve those. Other setups in the software are required. One of them is the vendor product cross-references. So you're going to go to the vendor in the warehouse product function under the general tab in the authorized replenishment path, and you're going to set up the vendor, and you're going to set up the vendor's product number. Now, having the vendor's product number in the system will reduce the errors significantly for matching products in your software. You should, prior to bringing a vendor on the software, you should obtain a list of the products that you sell, or their entire list if you do them all, and get their product number and have them loaded into the software. That way the vendor is not required to send you your part number. In this case, I've got a DW in front of the 1334, indicating a DeWalt. So when you're filling them out, apologize. Wow. Additionally, vendor cross-references are used for UPC numbers. If the vendor is sending you UPC numbers and they coordinate with how you got them set up in the software, then you should have them set up so they'll process through. These are the defaults that are used by the system set up in CloudSuite Distribution. Now let's talk about what's called X12 standards. In 1979, the American National Standards Institute chartered the Accredited Standards Committee to develop uniform X12, not an acronym, it's actually called X12, for inter-industry electronic exchange of business transactions. I'm going to focus on 3 of them that are used by inbound EDI acknowledgements: units of measure, purchase order add-ons, and ship via types or carrier codes. Let's talk about units of measure. Unit of measures are one of the most difficult things to manage in the software, especially through EDI. CloudSuite Distribution allows you 4 letters for a stocking unit of measure. However, EDI only allows for 2 characters. As a result, there needs to be a cross-reference from the 4-character reference to the 2-character reference. And I recommend that you set up anything that's going EDI with stocking units of measure that are 2 letters. I'll show you why in a second. So there's 2 ways to set these up. You can set them up in the generic table values for unit conversions. And an example of where you might do that is dozen, because everybody knows that DZ means dozen. Very simple, makes a lot of sense. So you would set up, if you're using a 4-character method for dozen in the product setups, a 2-character cross-reference for the EDI add-on code. However, you would not be able to do that for box, as various products have various box sizes. For example, a box of 1,000 would be set up as BX. However, I would have to set it up for that specific product because a box might be something different for another product. So that's where you would be using item-specific extended unit conversion setups. Let's take a look at both of these. Examples of what uses the X12 standard 2-letter unit of measures and flows easily using the table, the generic table. Each to EA, if you're only using each 4 letters, then that works. If you use EA and each, I'll show you in a moment why that becomes very difficult. Dozen is very common, DZ, so you can use that one in the generic table code value setups. C for 100 to 1, M for 1,000 to 1. Those are the common ones that you would set up in the code table code value setups, the generic inventory unit of measures. Here's an example of one being set up and where the gotchas come from. If I set up EA and EACH in my stocking unit of measures, and then I go into my generic table and I say they're both EA, well, that works when I send outbound documents, right? Whether it's each or EA, system doesn't care, it's sending EA. However, When I get an inbound transaction that says EA as the EDI unit of measure, it's going to find the first one. And if the stocking unit of measure is EACH, it will not get a match. And it will cause issues in matching the quantity unit of measures. Set those up in this manner at 1-to-1. Again, I recommend that you use 2 letters for EA and not EACH for setting up stocking unit of measures. Here's an example of a product that has various unit of measures. So you can see I'm using EA here for the 1-to-1. This particular product also has a 10-to-1 for a box, and CS for case of 100 and a pallet of 4,500. So my EDI unit of measures I would set up in the specific unit of measures would be BX, CS, EA, and PA. Now again, you need to get a list of what your vendor uses so that you use the same 2 letters. For example, they may use PL for pallet or CA for case. So be very specific between you and your vendor so that you're consistent across the board. Here's an example of a specific EDI unit of measure setup. This particular drill bit, by the case, CS, I buy it 100 eaches for the case. There's my stocking unit of measure. I'm calling it my EDI unit of measure is CS. That's my description I'm going to enter. And the conversion factor is 100-to-1. So that's a very simple setup for that specific product of what is a case and how many units are there. One of the gotchas here in the software allows you to do special price costing. It's a really cool feature of the software. And in the product setup, you would assign an item that might be priced differently than how you stock it. I might stock it by the foot, but I'm going to price it per 1,000 square feet. And my pricing figure conversion factor would be something similar to this, 0.08533. So how does EDI recognize that that's a unit of measure different from a normal unit of measure? It's a pricing unit of measure. In order to make that happen, you have to set this exact format up in the inventory pricing unit of measure set up by product. Notice I'm setting up the same product, stocking it by the feet. EDI unit of measure for this is 1,000 square feet, MS, per 1,000 feet. The stocking unit of measure, I put it in as conversion. I do the fraction and put in 0.08533, just as it was on this screen. And it does an automatic conversion for me into a stocking unit of measure. This will cause rounding errors for cents, and you've seen those, I'm sure, on a regular basis throughout the software if you're using special price costing. Again, the rounding errors are small, usually less than $1 for the transactions, certainly less than that per unit. The next one I want to talk about is purchase order add-ons. So in the generic table code value setups under purchase order add-ons, you would set up various, it's a 2-digit field. You can have up to 99 of them. Example here is, number 1 is freight, number 10 is for an advertising allowance or a credit that you're going to receive. And number 2 I've set up as a handling charge. So you're going to set that up in the generic table code values under purchase order add-ons. In this case, I've set up number 4 as an expedite fee, and I've given it a 4-letter EDI add-on code. Now that comes from the standards committee, from the X12 standards. They have over 1,500 different categories. Again, you're going to get with your vendor to determine what type of add-on codes are they going to use so that you use the same ones for the 4-letter codes. That will help assist throughout the software, not just in acknowledgements, but also through the process of costing supplier invoices when they come in as well. Carrier codes. This one's a little trickier. In the generic table code setups, you'll see things like UPS ground, UPSG. That's a pretty normal way to do it. It's a 4-letter field. You can do the description as you will. I believe it's limited in the 20 range, character range. However, it does not have a EDI unit of measure in it. in the setup table. The standards, here's a sample of what the standard codes look like. Notice UPS ground would be 70. So when you are implementing EDI with a vendor, this governs what the due date will be on the products coming in, which is probably the most critical piece of information that needs to be updated on the purchase order, on the line item for that item. When is it actually going to arrive at my door? Since there is no default which says how many days from such a date that will be computed as, you need to get with your vendor to determine what codes they use. And then there's a third party that does mapping between the vendor software and your software. They will get a document in an X12 format or in some other format from the vendor that'll go through this value add network where it will be reformatted into our XML document. They need to know how many days that are going to be added to the shipping date to get the due date on the purchase order line item. So if the vendor is shipping UPS ground, the value add partner needs to know what's the standard number of days when they ship UPS ground that they should add to the due date that gets loaded into the software. And they should have a cross-reference for each one of these products, each one of these carrier codes to the system so that it gets the right number of days added properly. Due date is probably one of the best reasons to use this process. Let's look at the vendor setups. On the e-commerce tab in the vendor setup function, you're going to specify the trading partner. You also can specify user field data that is used between you and your vendor on a regular basis. They're not required. They're only informational pieces of information so that you can execute information in processing the purchase orders. Additionally, on the e-commerce tab, under the process purchase order acknowledgement settings, there are two fields that are used for non-VMI, that's vendor managed inventory partners. I'm going to not talk about vendor managed inventory today, so I'll just talk about the two that apply to others. The first one on the left is to set the print status for notes and comments. You must check that box in that vendor if you want notes to be loaded onto the purchase order or comments onto the line items of a purchase order. If it's not checked, they will not import. On the right side, the update price field is critical for that vendor for you to know whether they have the correct price or you have the correct price. So for each vendor, that could be different. Some vendors, we get the data in quickly and we're really great at having our pricing correct. So you're going to say no there because you trust your software and you're doing excellent management of that software. In other methods, you seem to the vendor does a better job than you do. In that case, you want to update the price from that vendor. They have changes that happen continually and you don't get them in as quickly as they do. So that's a decision that the buyer that's using that vendor, that buys from that vendor, needs to make. These are buyer decisions. Operator security. Operator security is fairly basic to access these functions. So you go into the operator security settings under function security, and you give each operator that's going to use the electronic transaction control center a level 4. Now, level 4 means that they can change things. They can add or change transactions in that work center. The reason I don't set that to a 5 is because there's a purge function that can be used. A 5 would be the delete level. And we don't want people messing around deleting transactions so you lose the history before it's no longer useful. The second one is the inbox-outbox inquiry, that wonderful acronym, which I never remember, SAABIOI. Again, I set that to level 4. You can set the system and the administrative options to automatically purge these if they are processed properly. I don't recommend it because you really lose the history. Many people do that, however, so they only see the errors, and then periodically they'll manually delete the errors. So I set both of those to level 4, change and end. The other section, which is required to make it available in the Electronic Transaction Control Center, is under the other options in the operator security settings. You'll see down at the bottom here, I found the section which says EDI PO Acknowledgements, and I've checked that box to say it's allowed. If you do not do that, you will not be able to do search parameters in the ETCC function, regardless of your security. Let's talk quickly about the ION inbox outbox to view errors. It all starts out with the setups of ION connection points and data flows. And I'm going to demonstrate just a couple of those real quickly. This is the setup of an ION connection point. Now, in this case, what we're doing is we're saying we have a value add network partner that's going to receive these transactions from the vendor. And on our software, we set them up with a secure FTP transaction. We put the host name of the value add network, the name they've assigned you on their network, the method they use for authentication, the port number, and the password. Those are set up in a connection point for that value add partner. Then once you've set up the connection point itself, you then assign the various types of documents that you're going to process through that connection point. In this case, I'm showing an advanced ship notice, and I'm showing a purchase order. That is the acknowledgement. The EDI855 acknowledgement is a process.purchase order business object document transaction. That is the EDI855. So in here, you're going to say, I allow them to process those transactions. Then you'll set up what's called a data flow. Now that you know what transactions you're going to process, how are those transactions going to be processed? We're going to set up a process that's looking automatically for delivery of documents. It's going to pick them up, and here's where you define the documents. And then down below, you'll assign them there. You're going to add them and create a process purchase order transaction flow, the data flow. That'll let us bring it in and bring it into CloudSuite Distribution. Now, I'm just giving a very high overview of these. So if you need consulting in the setup of ION connection points and data flows, we have an excellent staff who can continue to work with you on that. I know some, but we have other folks who know it really well. You can do a lot of complicated routing of documents, changing of documents in the process, creating new transaction flows within here. So let's take a look at the search parameters for the inbox, outbox, and how to view and take corrective actions. When you go into the inbox, outbox, you're going to see on the left side of the screen a menu. You're going to set the direction to inbound, the status to error, because I don't really care about the ones that have processed here. All it's going to tell me is whether it processed or not. So I want to see those that did not come in today. I'm going to set the ION noun to purchase order, which is the EDI855 PO acknowledgement. I'm going to leave the bot ID blank. That's the business object document ID, and the specific ID blank. Within number of days defaults to a 7, and you're going to change that to 0 so that it will get everything for today. Now, if you come in the morning and you've received acknowledgements overnight, you might in the morning set that to a 1, the number of days. Once you've got this selection set up, you're going to click a search button, which will be at the bottom of the left side of the screen, and it will display this type of window. So this is the inbox outbox admin function. And when I map the BOD ID, the business document ID, I'll put the company number and I'll put the purchase order number in the mapping so that you can see it right there on the screen when you come in here. Now notice this one had 2 errors. On the far right, it'll actually tell you the errors, or you can drill down with the arrow, and then it will tell you what the error was that it found. In this case, the transaction wasn't processed because it didn't have a valid transaction set purpose code. And it's an 855 inbound document. Below there, you will see actually the document. This is the XML document below. And you can see that the purpose code referred to here is 01. The only valid purpose codes that are used in the CloudSuite distribution software are 00 for new, for an original, or 04 for change. Those are the only two valid ones. In this case, it's 01. So the document did not process at all. Now let's take a stop for a moment, and I want to reference that for every EDI 855 inbound document that you receive, you should get a hard copy of that document via email or have access to it so that you can do research if necessary. Now today, without using EDI, you are probably already receiving emails, which are the acknowledgements, and then you manually go into the purchase orders and update them. In this case, because it didn't come in, you would be able to go find that document for that purchase order in whatever directory you're storing those acknowledgements. At that point, you would go to IT or go back to the value add network and say, I need to reprocess this transaction and change that purpose code to a 00, to an original. Or you can go and manually update the purchase order as you're doing today. So I always keep a backup copy of inbound EDI acknowledgements so that I can verify any data that's questionable or any data that did not come in to the software. Let's talk about the Electronic Transactions Control Center. Now, this is the meat of the process. And if it's set up properly, 80 or 90% of the transactions will flow smoothly without errors, especially as you get more comfortable with each specific vendor. As you go into the ETCC function, a menu will appear on the left. And notice I mentioned that if they didn't have the controls access in operator security, then they would see a search and they would not be able to enter anything here. So that's what's governing being able to do the search functionality in ETCC. You'll come in, you'll change it to ION BOD, the process type. You'll set it for the inbound EDI855 PO acknowledgement transaction. You're looking for processed, which will include items that came in and processed, but their status ended up, the update status might be error, exception, or processed. In this case, I'm doing all because I want to see everything. The from date will default to today. Again, you could set it to yesterday if you wanted to. The to date equals today. Once you enter those selections and click search on the left side at the bottom of the screen, you'll get a screen that looks similar to this one. Now you'll notice the update status. The first status, everything got processed. They all came in. However, these processed complete on these purchase orders for this vendor. These two had errors, as did this one. There are 4 types of errors. Errors generally will stop the transaction from updating. Exceptions, on the other hand, is based on your business rule setups, and we'll go through those in a moment. Here you can see I've got 3 errors at the header level, and I've got 1 error at the line level. Again, it's indicating my purchase order and my vendor. There's a drill down on the left, and when you drill down into one, such as this one right here, notice here's a complete one for this purchase order, 1370, for that vendor. It processed complete. That means that it went through and it moved the purchase order to the acknowledge stage, and it updated what it was told to update at the line level for that purchase order. If you look down at the header level, you can see that in fact it was acknowledged at that date. It was accepted without change. Now that means we didn't change the due date, we didn't change a price, we didn't change a product. They just came in, it processed properly with no differences, and it was processed through the ION business object document. But now I'm inquiring in the purchase order and verifying on the header. Now we're taking a look at an error for invalid trading partner and invalid vendors. This particular one has 2 errors, and because it couldn't figure out who the trading partner was, it couldn't find the purchase order. So it shows 2 errors here. It does know who the vendor is because it actually does have the purchase order in the data. However, it couldn't connect properly to the partner code because the partner code wasn't set up properly. So what action do we take? You're going to drill down to see the errors, and then you're going to verify that the trading partner is set up correctly in the vendor setups. Once that's done, you may ask IT to bring the EDI855 document in again and reprocess, or you'll use your hard copy of the document to update the transaction, the purchase order. Let's take a look at business rules. The business rules that we talked about before, I'm going to walk through some of these now and how they impact the processing of the transactions. Notice that I've highlighted here the update dates. It is the most critical one that I find is the most useful piece of the EDI855 inbound acknowledgement. I have set at the company level to allow the system to do partial updates, so that if they send me data on line 1, but they don't send it on line 2, I can go ahead and update line 1. The audit's required. Ignore exceptions means that if I have small exceptions that don't affect the data significantly, go ahead and process them. That's set to no. Most of these at the company level will be set that way. You may decide that you want to have all exceptions held up so you can review them and change that. Sorry, it's set to not ignore them now to bring them in. You may say, yes, go ahead and ignore them. I'll handle it with my manual review instead. Right? This would then be a yes, and that would be a yes as well. I would ignore them because I'm going to do a manual review. If I'm not doing the review, then I'm not going to ignore the exceptions. I do want to see them. They do not always stop the updating of the purchase order. They do in some cases. I'll show you a couple. This one here talks about messages and what you should do in the case that you receive one of those messages. Now, if you go into the software and you try to enter a function that you don't have access to, you'll get a message like number 1000, menu item does not exist in menu control. And that's what this is referring to. I can do an action based on those messages. I have not used that myself at all with any of my vendors, any of my customers at this time. There are ways to use that, however. I'll not show you examples today. This one allows notes to come in and comments. This one allows the system to automatically cancel a document. Generally, I don't want the system to do that unless I am so confident that the vendor knows what they're doing. Same thing at the line level. I'm going to want to do those on my own. The manual review required you might use for a new vendor who you've never worked with before and you want to approve everything. I just referred to the updates when we started in here, which I'm going to come up to now, and then update quantities. Generally, I don't see my customers wanting to update the quantities automatically. They want to review them and approve them first. Let's talk about updates. So the system with updating dates updates 2 dates on the header and 1 date at the line level. The due date and the expected ship date. Those 2 fields will be updated, can be updated through the EDI855 inbound process. Here they are at the line level. We can only update the due date at the line level. We don't update any other dates there. So here's an example of one that came in complete on that purchase order 1387. And it's indicating a price changed exception. And let's go back. I apologize, that one's in the wrong place. Please ignore that. I'm moving back to the dates. Apologize, folks. So in updating dates, the business rule setup for updating dates. This is my data as it was entered on my purchase order. My header wants a ship date of the 15th. The 2 line items are the same. We're doing it overnight because we want that stuff quickly. When the EDI855 came in, it said, I'm not going to be able to get everything to you until the 21st, and that'll be the last item. At the line level, it said the expected ship dates are the same. And again, notice those were the ship dates. We then will also update the due date on the header and at the line level. Remember, I talked about the carrier and the number of days that would be added to the date the vendor sent in. These should reflect those revised dates. In this case, on PO 1387, you can see that the due date that came in was the 21st. All right, the due date sent, and that the last expected ship date is the 17th. Yes, right there. So here on the header, you can see that the due date's the 21st, the expected ship date's the 17th. And when I look at the line level, I can see the 21st on these two items and the 17th as due dates on the line level. Let's talk about ignore exception business rule now. What are exceptions? There are many exceptions in the software. One of them deals with the price, which I showed you before in the update price flag. If I'm saying no to update the price, and a price comes in different than what's on my PO, that will be considered an exception. And in this case, you can see the update status is set to exception. For that vendor, 1016, I said no to update the price. It is a line exception. If I select errors, well, I highlight that document, it will take me to the error screen for that document. Notice at the bottom, it says we've got an exception at line 1, and it's a price change, and the price will not be updated. If you select data, you can drill down into the data and see that the original price that came through was $22 a unit on line 1, and the vendor sending in $24 a unit. If the price is set to yes to update the price, then it will come in and you'll see that in fact, vendor 1017, it would update the price here. Now, our price is 22 as it starts out. Originally, line 1 is $22 a unit for vendor 1017, who does not allow the price updates. Does allow them. Originally at $22 a unit. However, when it came in, it was $25 a unit, and it will have updated that PO because this vendor allows update pricing. When you look at the purchase order at the line level, it'll be showing at $25 a unit. Validation messages. So vendor 1016 on validation message handling, this one allows notes to come in, and this is what's going to allow the notes to come in having this business rule set up. In the vendor e-commerce process purchase order acknowledgement settings, in the vendor setup record, you will have checked the box to set print status for comments and notes. If you do not check that box, that note will not come into the software. And generally speaking, you're not going to print those with the notes. However, the print flag should be set to do so. That needs to be checked. Here we're coming in and it's showing again as an exception. There's a header exception. There's a line item exception. If I drill down into the errors, I see that the transaction has header notes and it has line comments. Both of those. So now I'm drilling down into the data and I need to approve that transaction to flow through to the software. So when I select the data, I check the box, I approve the transaction. I then, it will pop up this window and I click OK. And the system will then change the approval code for that note to yes. That has to be done separately for the comments. When I do update transactions, it'll actually update the software, the purchase order itself with the comment and the note. We're going to see the note in a moment. The comment. So here again, I'm looking at data and notice I'm doing line instead of header. And I can see there's a comment over here on line 1. Line 1. I select it, I approve it, pops up my window, I select OK. I see it sets it to approval now. I do my update transactions. I say yes to approve everything that's there. I have not yet seen a method where I would not update some of them. So I generally will say yes to that box. Once that's done, and I go back to the main document section of the control center, I can see that that transaction is now complete. And if I go to the order, I can see on the right side of the overview that I have line item comments and notes, and that it got acknowledged today. If I drill down into the purchase order, I can see the note. We are closed on December 15th for inventory. If I want to look at the comment, I can go to the comment line item and go to the extended information on that line item, and I can see the comment by selecting comments for that line. Call us about our specials we're running for March. So that's how you would bring in notes and comments. Now let's talk about manual review required. I've got a new vendor. I've just set them up brand new. Their vendor, and I've said I want to review manual transactions on them, all of them, and approve them. So in the business rules, I'm going to create a new business rule. I'm going to select ETCC and require manual review. I'm going to put in my vendor. I'm going to save it down, and then it will appear in my list of business rules as a separate yes run value for that vendor. The rest of them will still not require review. If you've got one that says I have to review it, when it comes in, its update status is going to be blank. When I drill down and I look at my data, I can see that there's 3 line items in here. They've got quantities they're confirming of 10, 10, and 10, unit prices. Those are the products. There's my line items. You review that and determine that there's no errors, so you're going to proceed. You then would highlight, select them all for approval, check the approval button, say OK, and then update the transactions. That will change the approval to yes. You're going to select update transactions and yes. And that will then change the status. This is before. When you go back to the document screen, it was blank. You do the search screen on the left again to refresh it, and now it's complete and updated the purchase order. So moved it to the acknowledge stage. Events. So what I wanted to show here is that you can set up events for ETCC. I don't really see them being used too much because I'm not doing a bunch of stuff in ETCC here. However, if I approve a section, I might make an event that goes as an email or an alert through the software. These are the ones I really have not talked too much about. If you need more information on those, we'll be glad to work with you on them and go through them in detail. Again, it's the partial update, the message handling, cancel documents and lines, and the update of the quantity. In summary, what we've gone over today is the setups required for processing vendor EDI855 purchase order acknowledgements. We've taken a look briefly at looking the ION inbox outbox to see transactions that didn't process. We've also looked at ETCC to review and resolve various errors and exceptions. At this point, I'd like to entertain any questions that you might have.
Dave, thank you for that walkthrough. You did a fantastic job of showing how inbound acknowledgements are intended to work in CloudSuite, and also the the troubleshooting tips when things go sideways or don't go quite as planned. So as Dave mentioned, we're going to go to Q&A, and if you would, please go ahead and enter your questions in chat. Dave, I'll read those out to you as they come in. I do have one question I'd like to sort of throw your way right off the bat, actually, which is just in looking at excuse me, failed purchase order acknowledgements and the flow of that. When those fail, like how's that typically handled, or who is handling that?
The buyer should be managing the electronic transaction control center for their specific vendors. So the question is, who handles exceptions that might occur there? The buyer will take a look at what was in the control center, potentially try to drill down in the ION inbox outbox and see the document. However, those people aren't programmers. They're not going to know how to look for an XML document. Once they get the basic gist of what's wrong, they're going to hand that over to IT, and they're going to use their hard copy of the EDI855 acknowledgement document to actually update the purchase order if necessary.
Okay. Another one would be, you referenced the electronic transactions control center. How is data purged from the electronic transactions control center?
There is a purge function that would purge the transactions from the control center based on number of days old. The function is ETCCP, I believe.
Great, thank you. Just a question here in chat too. Will this be available via recording to review when we begin to attempt this setup? Yes, certainly. For those that have attended today, you'll definitely get a copy of the recording. That's true of the people that have registered as well, and we did get quite a lot of signups for this content. So thank you for that question. There's another one I'll run by. Should we be receiving a hard copy of purchase order acknowledgements?
So the question being, should we receive a hard copy PO acknowledgements? Yes, you should. You should always do that. You're probably doing that today, and that's how you're manually updating those purchase orders. You should always receive a backup copy or have them available either in your own system or on the vendor system.
Okay. What does a typical daily workflow look like for managing inbound purchase order acknowledgements?
In the morning, I would come in. Again, managing inbound purchase order acknowledgements, your daily workflow. In the morning and potentially throughout the day, I'm going to go into the electronic transaction control center and see what came in and had exceptions or errors. I'm going to manage those individually. I'm also going to look on the inbox outbox to see if anything failed to come in at all so that I can pass those back either to IT or the vendor to resubmit or manually update those POs.
Okay, and we'll probably hit one more here too. How are failed purchase order acknowledgements reprocessed?
They would be resubmitted through the ION workflow, the data flow that we saw. Usually the IT folks or whoever's doing development in your business would be able to resubmit a transaction and potentially edit it if necessary. Sometimes you might go back to the value add network partner and have them do that after you've done a setup that was required that had been missed.
Great. What would happen when the line number and product, if does not match for a non-stock item? I'm going to just reread that. What would happen when the line number and product sort of reads as if does not match for a non-stock item?
So the question being, I've gotten a product in and the line number doesn't find the item for the product that's been sent in. As a result, that will show up as an exception. You'll be able to drill down into the transaction itself and see the data in the electronic transaction control center so that you can determine what did the vendor send in, and it'll have it right there so that you can see the product number that they've sent in, as well as the line number they've sent in. Then you would go and manually update those particular items in the purchase order.
Okay. One more for you too. How are supersede acknowledgements handled?
Supersede acknowledgements would be set up in the software as an interchange, and if they exist, then there will be a direct hit on the new item coming in. However, if an item comes in that's different and it can't be found in the supersede section, then you would be calling the vendor up to say, what is this product you've sent me? Or you'd be going online to their software to see what the product was that they had sent you. Then you would go and set up your own supersedes and make sure that they are cross-referenced properly for the next time that that supersede comes in for that item.
Well, all right. I think we'll move to a close at this point. So Dave, thank you again so much. Really, really good content. Appreciate that. It's a lot of value to bring to a session and time and effort. And thank you so much for that. I'd like to thank everybody that was able to join us live today. And as mentioned, we will be sending out the recording in the next 24 hours, both to those who attended and those who are not able to join us live. Before we wrap up, I do have one more comment I'll mention too. We do have an upcoming NSA webinar scheduled for January 28th, 2 p.m. Eastern. This session will be presented by Orderful and is titled Why EDI Matters in 2026. It'll take a broader look at the continued importance of EDI for distributors and what to expect moving forward in the next few years. So we hope you're able to to join us for that session as well. And with that, I'll say thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.